at the Arvin Education Center. The first item of business is Ms. Corson. Will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Annie. Now the first item of business is to approve the agenda. Corrections or additions, Superintendent?
There are a little bit of both. If we've added a part of an instructional session, the CARES money, we weren't exactly sure that Leslie's working group was going to be able to get this done, but she has, and so we'd like to present that information to you all tonight, so that will take part in the instructional session, and we'll still do the annual drug and alcohol by Mr. Davis. And then on your table should be on enclosure B1, a supplemental that is provided by Mr. Bohannon, so please make sure that you have that. And then we had one typo on the agenda under action items K that should read consider approval of policy revisions for 2020-2021.
Did you all find all of that material?
Yes.
All right. So I need a motion to approve the agenda, please. Motion made by Mr. Dodson and seconded by Mr. Woosley. All those in favor? And that's 5-0. Thank you. Let's go to the instructional session, Superintendent.
All right, so we'll start off with Ms. Leslie Robertson, and she has done a bang-up job. I've informed you on my weekly news updates that she was going to handle the CARES money process for us. It's been rather lengthy, a lot of meetings, a lot of work, but she is very well equipped for this because of the work that she does with our federal title program. So it's very much aligned with some of those spending things. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Leslie.
Thank you so much. And
Welcome, Ms. Robertson.
thank you to Mr. Beatty for getting this up here for me. I apologize for the delay with the technology. Am I okay standing here?
Yes.
With my assistance? Okay, so hopefully you have the PowerPoint by now. You'll also be receiving, just so you know, probably in the next 3 or 4 days, a pretty extensive guidance document that goes with this that really puts this with a lot more specificity and detail in terms of how we came up with the needs, more about taking us through the process and what we looked at. But for today, we really just want to kind of keep you in the loop of where we are, what we're thinking, and where we're going. And to also provide you...
Should be up at the microphone,
Oh,
please.
thank you.
And to also provide you with an opportunity to give us any feedback from constituents that you've gotten or that you yourself want to share prior to our submission in July. Initially, the state was saying that we had a June 30th deadline. They have extended that now to be the end of July. However, we're ready to submit. Should you have any feedback you want to give us or things that come up, you'll find that we have some funds that we're sort of putting in a certain place, should we have needs that we're not aware of yet, that we can address those with. So we feel like we can go ahead and move forward with that June 30th date and get the ball rolling. So when we talk about CARES, I just want to explain that we're thinking of the CARES funding, if it's new to you, as an umbrella funding source, meaning it's got lots of pockets of money that feed into it from different organizations across the nation. So you're going to see kind of where all of those come together, what those funds can be used for and to support, and then what we in turn have decided to use to mitigate the damages we've seen from the COVID-19. So, just to let you know where our process started, about 2.5 weeks ago, we pulled together 34 stakeholders from across the district to include nurses, psychologists, counselors, principals, teachers, paraprofessionals, directors from central office. We pulled in parents, community resources, including homeless folks that run homeless organizations. So we really pulled together a huge group, which was such a great thing to be able to do at the last minute, but it gave us such insight into needs not only that we're seeing in our schools, but things that might be out in the community that have not reached us that we need to consider. We took those 34 stakeholders and we then divided those into 5 basic subcommittees so that we could focus more specifically on different parts of the needs across our district. Trying to address that all together would have taken us weeks, but by breaking up into committees where folks were experts, we were able to really get into the priority needs moving forward. What I challenged these subcommittees to do was to focus on the first 30, 60, 90 days, because at this point, even though it's going to look like a lot of money, it really is not. and we need to focus on getting school started, no matter what that looks like. But we also wanted to be mindful that we could run into some unforeseen barriers moving forward should we have another outbreak, should we not be able to open school in the way that we anticipated. And so we had to do this sort of with caution, but also meet the needs we need just to get the doors open safely. So here were the 5 committees that we pulled together. Student learning and instruction, obviously. Logistics, that's including things from everything from food service to transportation to PPE equipment, just how we keep this district functioning and running smoothly. Finance, and that was headed by our finance director. Student support services, we wanted to consider things like attendance, mental health needs, social emotional needs, as we open back up, things that we wouldn't always necessarily tie directly to student learning and instruction, but certainly would impact that. We were heightened to think about the fact that we know many families struggled with the NTI process across the nation, not only in our county, but across the nation. That can cause a great deal of anxiety, especially when it's not something that is typically done. And so we wanted to also encourage that committee to look at ways that we can help folks moving forward to relieve that stress parents have when they're probably going to even be back to work on our next NTI days. And so we want to make sure that we're sort of bridging that gap as well as we can. And then finally, we saw a need for just really a tightened way and more concise and streamlined way of looking at communication across the district. And I know Superintendent Schultz and Lori have done a phenomenal job, as have principals, of getting information out as quickly as they can. However, we know that information was coming to parents and families and community people from all over the place. And so we really wanted to look at how can we, moving forward, sort of bring all that together, have a couple of main streams of communication lines that get the same information, and really sort of tie together assistance that will help families should we have to continue with NTI days, for example, or should during the opening of school we need to be more flexible with our thinking. And so that committee really was looking at how can we do an even better job of getting school open. The chair people of these particular committees are listed there for you, and I want to thank those folks because I threw this together rather fast, and then they had to pull it together even faster, and they did a phenomenal job of facilitating that subcommittee work so that I could then come back with a primary team and start the real work of allocating those funds. So I appreciate those. 30, 60, 90-day plans, some subcommittees didn't get all the way to 90-day plans. They felt like the concentration of their work really needed to be focused on what needs to happen before we can even open school, and that is just fine. And some actually did go all the way to 90 days. What our main focus was when we were looking at the 30, 60, 90-day plan were reopening needs, and then what it's going to look like moving forward should we have intermittent times of instruction where that's done remotely, or some sort of hybrid model. So that kind of was the underlying theme for all of those committees to be thoughtful of as they moved forward. Following those subcommittees meeting, and they all met separately, so at that point 6 meetings had occurred. We had a 7th meeting, which was the primary team. That allowed us to bring key stakeholders at the district level, central office level, to come in and then review those 30, 60, 90-day plans to see if we needed to make adjustments, if we had other recommendations that committee didn't recognize that we knew were issues, and to then begin the process of going ahead and applying funds to those needs if we felt we could, and if we felt that was prudent at this time. So that's what that committee did. We met last week. We were able to do that. I'm going to share with you the findings of that. And then we also talked about what our next steps are going to look like, and I'll share that process just a little bit with you as we move forward. What's going to happen at this point, and what I've done over the last few days, is I've been now checking to see that all of the things we wanted to assign funds to were allowable expenditures, that they were appropriate, and that they were indeed a response to COVID-19 and not just good things that we want to do just because we found out some things through COVID-19. And so I have sent those requests off to KDE for prior approval, and I have gotten prior approval for many of them. I anticipate all of them to some degree will be funded, but before I actually put that in July, I would like to have some sort of idea of what's going to pass muster. And so they're working on that, and I'll get that information to you. According to everything I can look at, they are all allowable. They're pretty black and white. However, there's always the off chance that someone disagrees, and I would just rather have that happen on the front end before groups of people start doing a whole lot of in-depth planning. As soon as we're done with next steps, I'll take any questions you have. What I am now doing is sharing the needs assessment results and the plan with you. And then Stephanie and I, Ms. Anderson and I will meet in the next week to finalize what is going to actually look like in our Munis system, and so that we are making sure to calibrate both GMAP, which is where we list our federal funding budgets, and in Munis that they match, and that she and I are very much aware of how these funds are going to be spent over the course of the next 2 years. I anticipate the majority will be spent in the next few months, but we actually have several years to get that money spent. At this time, we don't anticipate any future funding unless another huge outbreak happens, and so we want to be real mindful to make this money last us in terms of sustaining us and putting us in a better position to react to something like this. And she and I will be working really closely to make sure that happens. We're sort of co-chairing that together. The primary team will get back together quarterly to look at our plans. Did we actually do what we said we were going to do? Did it work? Was it effective? Do we need to make changes to it? Were we in budget? Do we have additional needs that have now come up now that time has passed that we weren't aware of that we want to allocate new funding to? And so that's something that's going to happen on a quarterly basis unless an emergent need happens in the interim time, in which case we will stop, drop, and sort of roll and make sure that we get those needs taken care of. And then, obviously, Ms. Anderson and I, we will be meeting regularly as needed to make sure that we're in alignment. This is new territory for everyone, including finance and my department, and so there's just not a lot of folks we can follow the lead on. We're going to have to sort of take charge and move forward. So at this time, are there any questions about sort of how we got to where we are today?
I have one question.
Do you, Mr. Woosley?
Leslie, out of the 34 people that were on the stakeholders, you called them, were there any board members on there?
There were not. The opportunity for input for board members we felt would happen now prior to submission. And the rationale being is really just having such a large group to try to manage in just a very short period of time. We just felt like we could get you all's feedback once you saw what we were thinking and then bring that together. So certainly it was considered, but just was not something that I could pull together in that amount of time and ensure where you would be exactly on a subcommittee. But
Thank you. And I'm hoping that you will get into the specifics.
yes, we're going to be very specific here in just a minute.
Ms.
So.
McKinney.
Yes. Okay. Were there any other questions before we move forward? Okay, again, when I started, I anticipate that you've heard from your friends, colleagues, folks you go to church with, school folks, concerns that happened over the last few months, things that maybe you experienced in your own family if you have children that go to school, or that you've seen that you're kind of wondering, hey, maybe we can do those things better. That's sort of the same mindset that a lot of the folks that came to the committee had, and that's what we want to share with you. So if you have things, again, above and beyond what we share today, please feel free to share those. Again, I try to limit folks' thinking to the first 90 days. However, that doesn't mean you can't share something bigger than that. It simply meant we've got a very short amount of time to get this ball rolling for school. And so that was our focus. So to get more specific, one of the process requirements.
Leslie,
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry. I would request at some point that you share the committee members with
They're on your
board members.
PowerPoint by name.
Thank you.
They're at the very end, all of their names and their role.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. One of the things that I want to stress to you is part of the process when you get any kind of federal money is that you are using that money, obviously, in a responsible way and based on your needs. And so a needs assessment is part of the requirement. We probably did a more in-depth one than was required, to be honest with you. And the reason we did that was because we are in uncharted waters here, and we want to make sure we are not leaving any stone unturned. But the Student Learning and Instruction was the biggest committee. When we divided into subcommittees, it had the most members because it included folks who represented all the populations, special populations we have. It included folks who are looking at things like social and emotional needs of students, curricular needs of students. And so it was a much larger committee you're going to find than the others. But they had a lot to look at. And they actually broke into more than one committee in order to just get that work done. They were so large. They were able to meet in person, which was great. And they did this over multiple days. So here are their findings of what they thought would be the most pressing things for us to consider in the first 30, 60, 90 days. The very first one was the one that you've probably seen the most on the news, which is where a lot of this CARES funding has come out of, was that they Nationally and locally, we've recognized that our teachers need to build some capacity with being able to deliver high-quality instruction in a remote environment. That's a different vehicle and not training that most folks have ever had. Sometimes we have dabbled, obviously, in that for special assignments or projects, but this is the first time where that has become a way of delivering instruction to students, sometimes with content for the very first time. And so part of the CARES funding required that you really look at getting teachers professional learning specifically as it relates to remote learning. In addition to that, that also included a component about just looking and giving folks PD on a digital platform. Meaning, what are we going to use to deliver that, whether that's Google Teams or whatever they need to look at in order to get that information out. And so they are actually going to be getting professional learning, mandatory professional learning in both of those areas. One of the requests that came out of this committee to the primary team was that we choose just a few digital platforms to make that easier on parents. Because if every teacher is using whatever they kind of want, and a parent's trying to, at the end of the day, figure out what their 3rd grader, 6th grader, 10th grader need and learn the platform, it could be overwhelming. And so that is something they've been charged to do, is before school starts, come up with the best ones we can use that, and then train our families on how to access it, how to use it, how to submit work. So those are some things that you're going to see in the first 2 bullets. The next thing is we know we got a lot of feedback from parents from more than one school that it was just simply too overwhelming to do virtual learning with their children. Whether that be, even if we gave them a device, it didn't solve all of their issues. For example, maybe they had a computer at their home, but they have 4 kids, and they're also working from home. So that computer's tied up all day, and they're trying to get all their kids on. Those are some communication things we can work with them on, getting them more devices. But even still, the parents said, just give me paper pencil. And so we're trying to work on, we've got a committee, the SLD committee is actually going to be looking at to what degree can we still and should we still offer paper pencil options for students and families, oftentimes even those with special needs, so that they can still access the curriculum, and it may not be in a virtual sense. And so we're looking to offer both options. The logistics of that will be the biggest issues. How do we get the work to them? If it was an extended period of time, which we were able to do for the last few months, so we know we can do it, but we're just looking at ways that we can do that better. So those were some considerations. Another big push out of the CARES funding was to ensure that career tech was able to be pushed to the next level. Preschool needs were met, GT needs were met, and then of course things like English language learners, special education 504. And so what we also discovered were that many of these subpopulations didn't respond that well to the way that we were able to deliver instruction. And that's not trying to take anything away from the fine work that our teachers did. But what we've learned from the experience is moving forward, we have to have equitable access to instruction for all of these students. And so our new assistant superintendent of student learning is already working on that. You're going to see that a little bit further down the road, but that we kind of apply a litmus test, and we actually wrote a litmus test saying when you choose activities, they need to meet this criteria to make sure that all these folks are getting what they need when we choose to provide that for them. We also know that when we missed several months of school, we created, just by circumstance, gaps in instruction for students, and that we're going to have a lot of 3rd graders who are now going to 4th grade missing some vital skills. While we may have tried to introduce those from that virtual platform, we know that a lot of students probably did not really get the level of instruction they needed in order to solidify that understanding. And so a plan is being developed of how we fill in those gaps when we return to school, so that we're reviewing old material while also being held to the standard of introducing our new material. So that is high on the priority list. And then we also need to keep in mind that this really has impacted the early graduates program, career tech again. A lot of that's hands-on stuff. You can't do a lot of that virtually. We have to rethink how we look at that. And probably my biggest concern is in the area of preschool, because we are required to take any at-risk, meaning students who qualify for preschool based on usually income. We're required to take those kids and service those. Because unemployment rates are up across the state, we don't yet know how many more parents of 4-year-olds are now going to qualify for preschool services that did not previously qualify, that we may have to serve. And so we're keeping that sort of, we're checking everything we can with Child Find to try to get a sense of what are we looking at adding a classroom, are we looking at adding staff, And we wanted to reserve some of this funding. Also, should that have to happen, we may even, have to rent a space. We don't know. And I'm not trying to be an alarmist, but the reality is we really don't know in terms of how many families this has impacted locally that could affect our preschool program. To continue with student learning and instruction, again, they were the biggest group, so they have the most slides. They have 2 slides. One of the other things that has come out of this is remote learning is not a new concept, but it is a fairly new concept outside of programs that are sold for homeschoolers as a way to deliver instruction on a regular basis. And so this committee felt it was important to get some of our leaders at the district and school level involved in doing research on what are some best practices, some evidence-based practices, and really understanding how to deliver instruction and curriculum virtually. So they wanted us to set aside some funds to allow them to do that research so that as we continue to plan throughout the year, we're doing so with a mindset of knowing that what we're doing has potential to actually work. The new Assistant Superintendent of Student Learning is working with Dr. Angie White on a virtual learning academy for NTI. It is going to encapsulate sort of a lot of what we're talking about here. Another big issue that we ran into are the spring is a big time of assessing and screening students for special services like First Step, Special Education, EL, GT. And because we weren't able to screen those students face-to-face, and oftentimes that is the only and best way you can do it is observe, those students didn't get their assessments. And so we got to provide some funding and time, because folks will be out of their contract, to go back and assess those students. And actually they emailed me this morning and said, can we start? And the bottom line is we have to start regardless of this funding or not. So my answer was yes. Start. As it pertains to special education and First Steps, we've got to get that assessment process rolling so that those students have the right services when they move forward in the fall. With that, we also know that the NTI brought with it, for a lot of our most severely disabled students who require extra technology to communicate, we typically refer to that as assistive technology, they may need special devices that allow them to access this virtual world of instruction. And so we are bound to provide those regardless of this funding source. And so what's basically happening with that are the special ed teams are working together to figure out who is impacted by that and what amount is needed, if any. At this point, I simply reserved and earmarked some money because of the likelihood that there will be some. However, at this point, we don't have a number for that. And that ties right on into the next one, which is compensatory education for special education students. When a special education student is not provided all the services, in layman's terms, according to their IEP, sometimes, and I know you'll probably run across this as board members, we are required and have an obligation to provide compensatory education services. We know we have some who didn't get all they needed or should have gotten during the closures. And so I am told we are starting to review all these cases, but it could take until October to know. I was shocked to find out there wasn't a timeline. One of my questions was, is there not a timeline for us in terms of how quickly we have to do that? And I'm told there is not. But that it could take as long as October when we're actually back in school and they can do some of these observations and assessments to see exactly who needs them. We also realize that when we come back to school, we are going to be practicing to whatever degree we can some social distancing, which means the old days of me sitting next to my partner and us doing our lab together or working with our math manipulatives is probably not going to be the best thing to do. And so that is going to require us to have more manipulatives, more lab materials, things like that, so that students can do that in a more individualized way, or at least to the degree where we can clean between episodes. Also, we know that should we have an extended period of NTI, they're going to need to bring that stuff home in order to really do some of the things we want to do with them. And so this committee really wanted to have us consider buying additional resources, particularly for this purpose, not just because, hey, we need some more math resources, but particularly for these needs out of this funding source. And then finally on this slide, you're going to see that one of the obligations we have is to make sure we have a continuance of services for students who are receiving intervention during times of closure, meaning if I get ESS or Title I or just regular intervention, Tier 2 intervention because I'm struggling, we have to provide that in addition to their regular instruction during NTI days. That was a difficult task to do. And so the recommendation is that we purchase a software program to assist with that we can use while they're in person, not to a large degree because face-to-face and in-person instruction is always best. but that we can use it some with them in person so that when we do have to go to an NTI day, it will not be new to those students. They'll be used to going and doing some work on the computer, some work with the teacher. And so that is what that simply refers to. That's the end of the needs that came out of the first 30, 60, 90 days from student instruction and learning. Are there any questions particular to those or
Yeah.
any additions?
I've got one or two. We got a lot of kids in the district, and I know we go to NTI, a lot of parents don't have internet, and when they do have internet, they don't have enough internet. We had it the same in the school here. And then parents are still working at home. That's going to create a big problem, especially if they don't have internet at all.
And know that we're getting ready to move into logistics, and that is an issue that we are addressing and that this funding can assist with. And so we are very aware that we have two issues with the technology. One is it's not enough for them to just have it. We've got to make sure they also have the data that will allow them to use it. They have to have a device to use it that they're not having to share with 16 other people trying to work from home or do schoolwork from home. But then you also have that learning curve from folks who that is just not their norm. So that's a very valid concern.
Second point on that, you know, people always try to get something for nothing. And what prevents a parent from, if we end up having to subsidize their internet or what have you, canceling theirs to get it from us?
I guess the short answer would be we can't police it to a large degree. We have to meet the needs as they come before us. And here's an example of why. I could suggest to a family that, well, I could ask questions, say, haven't you had internet? Yeah, we've had it. But there's nothing to say that their family's now not under a financial strain where they no longer can afford internet. Or the data package they had before simply will not accommodate all the needs they have now. And so the short answer is I think there's going to have to be a strong level of trust. Obviously, we have a budget. We can only do what's within our budget. We'll probably be looking at some hot spots in some key areas where we know multiple homes may need to be served, in, for example, an apartment building or a trailer park, where we can have some controls. And I think also what's going to help is that we can control what that internet is used for. And so we are making sure that we are able to put controls on there. Short answer to ensure folks are not looking at sites they shouldn't, whether those be students or adults in the home. We want to make sure that they're being used for that purpose. And so, great questions. And really, we found out after the fact, we felt like we had given all the devices of people. We certainly gave it to everybody who requested one, who said they needed them. But our communication was such that we had families who came back and said, but I really didn't, I guess I didn't get the message. I didn't know. So part of our new plan is to make sure we're communicating. But with that, every time we send a device out, that's more personnel we have to keep that equipment up and running. You're going to see in a bit, we're going to ask for some reimbursement for some damages and loss as a result of loaning out computers. That's going to come with this territory for sure. However, it is just, we just don't see any way around it. We've got to put those in the hands of the folks.
Yeah. Patrick, hold that thought. Mr. Kehoe, I think the superintendent needs an opportunity to weigh in here.
Well, I was just going to also say that sometimes the internet connectivity, KDE has some regulations, like they don't want us to be involved in that process whatsoever. We're not supposed to be the middleman. And so we have put out information where families could access reduced rate or free internet, but by their statutes and regulations, we're not supposed to be getting involved in that. That limits some of our liability as far as the cyber issues and all those other things. So Trey at some point probably could step in and answer that question when we actually had him present, because from the onset, we started looking at that last year when we were doing NTI, and I wouldn't say our hands are completely tied, but they're bundled to some degree on some regulations from KDE that we're just not allowed to get around.
The reason I was concerned, it might be pulling money from one area we really need in another area. And that's why I was asking that question.
Good question. It is a very small percentage of this budget. Strikingly, I was shocked at how low actually what we perceive to be the need right now financially for that to support it is compared to our other needs.
Well, and this CARES funding is a separate funding stream too, Ms.
I know that,
Watson.
but we don't want the money to run out where we have to pull from one area of it to another, is what I was looking at.
We do know that regardless of KDE and their stance, that federal law requires that we provide these students with
Yes.
access. And so Trey is looking at some things, new devices we can buy that have some internal structures built into those. And so, again, there's a committee working on how does this look.
Right. Right.
But you can't deliver remote instruction without it.
Right.
And to say that all of our families, I remember early on I had folks call me saying, well, all of our families have computers and stuff. And I'm saying, no, they really don't. And they don't all necessarily have data, and they don't all necessarily have 2 or 3 computers. And so, it's an awakening factor for us thinking about what that can look like.
Mr. Kehoe, I know you had a question.
Yeah, so with all these action items there in the last 2 pages, was our traditional school schedule a concern for any of the committee members? And if so, what were some of the concerns?
There is a separate committee, and I can let the superintendent speak to that, that's looking specifically at the traditional schedule. The only lens, for lack of a better word, that these folks on this particular committee would have looked at would have been through the lens of what do we need to do while in person, while we have kids in person, to prepare us for a transition should we have to go to NTI. And so doing more of this virtual instruction during the class day so that that transition is a bit easier, sending things home with kids every single night in the event that tomorrow there's going to be an NTI day. And so there were a lot of logistical things that they're going to be addressing, but instructionally beyond that, the only other thing I will tell you we looked at was when we talk about professional learning moving forward, and we just talked about this with the primary team, we have to be of the mindset that whenever we start a new initiative, whether it be a reading initiative or a math initiative, is we've got to train our teachers what this can look like in a different world. Because to simply just instruct them how to do phonics sitting on the carpet, and that's the only way they know how to do phonics, and then they move to an NTI day, it's not going to be beneficial for them. So it kind of changed our mindset a bit. I don't think that really answered your question, but I think that was more of a task assigned to.
Yes.
Are you talking about when we go back in the fall?
The reopening.
Yeah, go back and do we,
So there's a subcommittee on the reopening task force that's looking at all the guidance and regulations that's put forth by KDE and the public health sector. And so that's a different group than what Leslie's been working with.
That was the email that I sent Mr. Kehoe when all those chair people had their first meeting last week.
Right.
In terms of how do we go back to school in the fall. This is a very specific focus on NTI as it relates to the pandemic and whether we have to be out of school for a considerable amount of time.
so I don't know if this is time for this question or not, but I know a lot of colleges are eliminating any off days until Thanksgiving. After Thanksgiving, they're taking a long extended break until January. Was that ever brought up?
That, I think your question will be answered by the work done by this committee.
Okay.
And
Good question.
we will be collaborating once they get that work running. That committee actually met right after we did, and so we will be corresponding with one another about it, but we haven't done any work together. When we think about the next step, which is logistics, which is we've got to just be able to do school, and what that looks like. How do we house kids? How do we keep them safe? How do we get to where we're going? How do we feed them? How do we transport them? How do we ensure that we're also abiding by all the laws and rules that we have to abide by just in doing school? The Logistic Committee came up with their focus areas, which is what you see in parentheses at the top, really looking at mass gathering spots. For example, starting school off back in person and having everybody in the cafeteria is probably not our best bet. So we probably are going to move more towards a grab and go or delivering food to the classroom. That costs money to set up. We have to buy carts. We have to buy technology that allows us to put in the students' information for payment information on food. We have to buy more disposable trays and utensils. Our trash pickup then is higher than it typically is because we're having more waste. And so really we dug deep into seeing what the implications were for just food service. That doesn't even talk about what's going to happen if we have NTI days and we have to deliver food. That's just our in-person part. So food services really had to look at both of those things. What are we going to do and what do we need in order to serve food during times of outage? And how do we need to change the way we do it currently when we're in school to make sure we have social distancing and all of those things. We also are looking at exactly what you brought up, which is those folks who still don't have data, who still need data just to make the technology work. And so that's something that we're looking at. Additional devices that we can loan out to families and have them sign out and be able to use those things during times of NTI. We needed additional thermometers. We have bought some. We need more. We need one with the maintenance staff. We need one with the bus garage. We need additional ones in the schools. And so those were things we were thinking about. General PPE like gloves and masks, my understanding from Brett Bohannon is he feels like we can cover that with our existing budgets outside of these funds. But should things blow up again, we want to make sure that we have funding there for additional PPE. Specialized barriers came up, and this is a point you're going to see a pretty large budget attached to this. We don't know that we'll need as much as we've put out. Initially, this committee wanted plexiglass everywhere. However, Mr. Bohannon did a great deal of research, and actually I've read quite a bit in the last few weeks. So that's not as sanitary as folks are thinking it is, if you're not able to regularly clean those at a constant. And so his advice was not to go to the extreme that this committee was pushing for. However, we do know that there are some places we definitely need to have it. For example, if I'm a speech teacher, where I'm close to a student who's watching my mouth, we need glass between us, right? Or face masks or something. There are certain students who need to see, they can't wear masks.
Face masks will not work in
Yeah, they
that
won't
case.
work. And so we know that we're going to need some in specialized classrooms, like the Human Resource Department downstairs. Any place where a line is likely to occur, we may want to consider some of these protective barriers. But this is an area I think we've over budgeted in, but I'm okay with that because we can move this money flexibly. We just have to start with it somewhere. So we started with what they thought they would need at the most if they went full-fledged in with these plexiglass barriers, knowing that we probably would not need that much. Probably the largest ticket item is the next one. So even though this is a short list, they are the most expensive list. We are looking to purchase misters on carts that will be provided to every site, and the product that goes in those misters to do sanitation and cleaning more readily. Also, we have handheld sanitation devices that every school will receive, each of those sites will receive, and so those things are pretty big ticket items. You'll see a price tag to that here shortly. And then Trey did an excellent job of sort of looking at our losses for NTI in terms of devices, and it looks like that we suffered about a 2% loss damage replacement cost on the devices that we loaned out this past spring to families needing computers at home. And so that, not only we would like to recoup that money from this funding source, actually pay ourselves back with that, we want to also be mindful that moving forward, whatever we purchase has some built-in capabilities to offer some of those protections should these things happen again, and to also help with some of this data issues that we know that we're having. By doing that and having that data controlled within that one system, we have a lot more control of what's able to be accessed. So those are the big things that came out of logistics. Any questions about logistics?
On misters, you got to be very careful with them because once you mist, based on the type of floor, it comes so slick you could have some people slip and hurting themselves.
I will pass that on.
Because we had that at work today, matter of fact.
Wow. I will pass that on. I know that we did have to do quite a bit of work to ensure that the product we used was that you could have your own food and that sort of thing. You know, we didn't want anybody getting sick and safe, but I have not heard that particular concern, so I will definitely share that.
We missed it this one room, and you walked in and you thought you were skating on ice.
Oh, wow.
So
Well, I will definitely.
there may be a time limit to it, I don't know, but
Before you can
it's
get on it,
something you might want to look at.
we will absolutely do that.
Mr. Woosley.
When you're talking about each site, are you talking about each school and then central office transportation?
I don't think Central Office Transportation Bus Garage will get the misters and the handheld sanitation. I think it will simply be all of our school sites to include Arvin and Arts and preschool. They did not specify that our locations would need something like a mister. And he only asked for 20, so I'm assuming no.
And is transportation under logistics, or is that under a separate section?
Transportation is actually under logistics. However, they identified no special needs at this time. I will tell you, we're going to talk about FEMA in just a little while, which I'm hesitant to talk much about, but one of the things that we are going to be hopefully looking at through FEMA is potentially some reimbursement costs for transportation. That is the only funding source that anyone has mentioned in any of the groups I've worked with, that they may want to look at something associated with transportation in terms of additional costs. So I'm going to assume that for at least the first 30, because there was a representative on this committee from transportation, that they felt like they could control their needs, at least in the foreseeable future. Obviously, if we went to a schedule like you were talking about, which we're certainly hoping we don't, where we've got these hybrid models, I anticipate huge impact to transportation and something like that. But right now, at least for the first 30, 60, 90 days, they did not identify any needs.
So no additional buses would need to be purchased. Did you guys talk about adding Wi-Fi to buses that we could take to a spot and create our own hotspot?
We have talked about that, not within this committee, but Trey and I have talked about that on more than one occasion as of late. And so right now, I think what Trey is looking to do is first get a better sense of what the real need was. We did a survey that, I'll be honest with you, I don't know why it fell apart, but it didn't yield, what the results we got were not true to what actually the need was. So we're doing another survey and needs assessment with families to really get a better picture of what exactly is your need. Because when you write a generic, for lack of a better word, survey that says, do you have a computer in your home? Well, there are some folks who will say yes just because they don't want to be embarrassed. You know, there are some folks who have it but don't have internet. And so, or I have data, or if you say, do you have access to data? Some families were saying, well, I have it on my cell phone. So we just need to do a better job of communicating exactly what they need. And then Trey will be working with different folks, specifically, as Mr. Schultz said, with KDE under the parameters of what's allowable for us to do under contracts, under vendors, and that sort of thing. But we have discussed mobile hotspots, moving things. And we've discussed putting them in different community resources.
There are other districts who have got Wi-Fi on buses, and they take those buses out and park them in locations where they know that there's no...
And that is not off the table. That is something, and I'll be honest with you, I've been
But it wasn't discussed.
It's not probably that it wasn't discussed. I guess at this point, there's a committee who's going to be working to determine what those data needs are, and then that should come out of the solution phase of that. But I think their first step is to figure out what their needs are.
Not really.
Okay. Any other questions? I'm going to move us along, board members, and if you have comments, please share them by email with Leslie. Let's try to limit the rest of our discussion to questions, if you don't mind.
Okay, thank you. Student Services looks at things like attendance, social emotional wellness, those other things that surround students and families and their ability to do school and to learn well. Also includes things like safety. We have to still adhere to the guidelines under Senate Bill 1 in terms of drills and locked doors. But how does all that play together when we're also trying to have social distancing and sanitation? And so this committee really had to look at a whole lot. We were particularly interested in looking at what attendance looked like during the last 3 months, who actually participated in the last 3 months of NTI, what was our outreach. And then also we have to have some sort of idea of the number of students who may not return in the fall that we're anticipating, because obviously staff has already been hired to have those classrooms. So it could result in lower class sizes. However, if those students who don't return are able to access services like Homebound, because they have a physician's note that says it's not safe for them to come back, or they live with a family member who has an issue and it's not safe for them to come back because that might put that family member in jeopardy, then we could potentially have a large number of students who we need to service on a homebound basis. We also know that we have staff who have compromised systems, who cannot do face-to-face instruction when we return in the fall. So it's also about getting a handle on how many of those folks are there. Can they be the ones to do this virtual home, because homebound services are going to be delivered at least in the fall virtually. So maybe they can be the ones to deliver that service. We're already paying them if we have a large number of students who are not face-to-face. So what does that look like? That's going to involve a really intense survey that's going out, I believe, the beginning of July, to sort of wrap our heads around how much has this impacted people's willingness to send kids back. You also are probably going to have some who pull out and just choose to homeschool as a result of just not feeling like they want to send their kids back. And so we also know that some of the mental health facilities that a lot of our students go to are not able to see students right now because of the pandemic situation. So we know there are kids who are not getting serviced. So we're trying to figure out how can we bridge that gap. Some simply just can't get to their services. They have day treatment. They don't have any transportation. So that's something I am looking into to see if we can assist with. We know we have some classrooms across the district and a couple of schools that have poor air quality, And if we have to have doors locked and closed, that's going to be a safety and a health issue for those students. And so one of the purchases you're getting ready to see are for some portable air filter systems for those unique classrooms. We would like to see our nurses, they would like to get together and develop. I'm trying to go fast because I know you have a lot going on, so slow me down if you want me to dig in somewhere. Our nurses are going to be getting together to develop lesson plans that they will deliver in classrooms to students about social distancing, how to stay well, how to stay safe. While they're back in school, we'll probably do that the first couple of weeks of school. There will be stipends, obviously, for that. We are looking at some of our schools to have our students lead and promote a campaign for health and wellness. We know that masks are probably or may not be mandatory, but so maybe these students could encourage some of that. And so what they would like are some incentives for the students to promote staying healthy at school. So this is that in there. That's some trauma care stuff going on, some training for that. And then really just educating folks and making sure that they know what we're doing while we're doing it. For example, when folks come up to check their kids in and out, they're going to have to put their mask on, obviously, so they can see their face. So just things like that, just see the small detail things that we need to be thoughtful of in this committee. Are there any questions about the big things from this committee?
There's a lot of overlap in these last two sections with what the committee will be doing in order to figure out how to go back to school. So I understand where the confusion is. This is supposed to be CARES funding related, but I see that you all have given a lot of consideration to other things, how to get us back in. It is funding related.
Yes.
Sure. Superintendent.
So the really only reason that there's a separate, that we're not talking about this with reopening is because it is a funding stream, a separate funding stream.
Yes.
And that has to be provided for within the federal guidelines is why it's a separate entity at this point.
But that's why I
we'll have more
understand.
needs than what the money suggests, by far, as every other district in the state will. So, but this is just what this committee that's talking just about the funding stream for just the CARES money needs to take care of first.
Thank you.
Okay, and I think it's not going to go over finance, but everybody has that board protocol, the staffing, community relations, and communication, the big thing is, again, how to get information out in a clear, more streamlined way to our staff and also to our families, we're not making stuff up everywhere. So that's a big part of what's happening. And I'll be doing a newsletter with everyone each chunks of time and put it all together that goes out, it will go out via Lori, so you all will get that, leaders, the school will get that, teachers will get that, and everybody around the loop. Big topic of conversation here for our families that came up during the NCI, and so some of the things that they asked for say that they have a need for a bilingual counselor. That doesn't even actually have for a while, because they're tied to somebody that they think is relevant here, certainly they've been beneficial. And so we are really need to get that need to other federal funds. That's why I highlighted that up with this regard is important, but I think they need that somewhere else. And then the EL phone hotline, there's a lot of our administrators they struggle with being able to get a hold of someone and get information going. And what does this system look like if you would have a standard stipend agreement with a certified bilingual person who would agree to do additional outside of work day, take their phone calls on a phone we issue to them, and they log all their phone calls, and they can be able to assist EL families up until a reasonable hour every evening, and then at a certain point on the weekend, should they have needs that they can meet at our individual schools. The last thing that you're going to see is really all we need to help families academics this way of changing learning. And so all the workshops for them to come in and we can say, hey, let's just talk about how you answer email, or how you sit at work, or what's this platform like, or how you should communicate with your teacher. You know, so just really opening that up. And then finally, knowing the registration was interrupted with all that's going on. And so maybe really consider more outreach on registration to make sure families, particularly those incoming students, know what they're doing and what's happening with getting the ball rolling for school to start.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're running resources. We have two big pots of money coming out of here. One is year funds, which is the governor's emergency education relief fund. It's $75,113. It is mainly for two purposes, one of two purposes. for professional learning, for remote learning reasons, and for continuity of food services in the county of Logan. So those funds, what I did is take any needs that we had specific in those areas and I targeted that funding source first. Because ESSER, which is the big pot there, allows for that as well. So I want to go use ESSER funds more flexibly. So I charge those to the other stuff, and you're going to see that in a second. That's a bigger pot of money, $436, $437,832. We'll get into how to spend that in just a second. There is a program called EET. It's not an actual revenue stream or direct allocation to our district. However, it is an allocation that our families can tap into. So if they have a student on free or reduced lunch or in the case of the branch, every student, those families can simply get on a portal, put in their student's SSID number, and they can send them an EET card with up to $300 per child that they can use on food in the grocery store over the next year. So one-time payment, and it is, we don't pay it, all we do is have to communicate to parents how to get the SSID and get the word out that it exists. So I wanted to put that up there to let you know that it is, we've done that.
Excellent.
FEMA, and you're aware of FEMA for natural disasters, and actually has a component of the CARES Act for struggle leader. Initially, it's going to be far more limited in the category reading about what we use funds for. As late as this morning, I got a little bit more information. However, how we work this is reimbursement based. You simply put together, you're very difficult, but you put together a plan. You put together a plan, you submit it for reimbursement, and if you have the proper documentation, you could get us usually 75% of whatever
Your
is allowed. The issue is you have to have a plan worker, caseworker, whatever you want to call it, contact you walk through that process. I believe this person has put in all the paperwork to get the program started. We're still waiting for our contact person. My understanding is only one district in the state that can contact us. That's the one I asked someone who may use the transportation things up. It's very limited. I just don't know how much we really have that we can get reimbursed for. So I will have to really use talking about our numbers when we get them. Just know there is no action number here. We'll do the best we can to get reimbursed for what we can. And then the child development, we can consider a whole different funding stream. It actually is $225 per student in our child daycare students. That's the amount we have for each of our primary centers. Plus $6,000 per site with the exception of little girls to do cleaning and PPE type of things. There's still some questions about some of the PPE. It looks like they want to be more clean. I'm not going to go into how that is spent. I'll also tell you this. They're essentially doing some honors and they're using it to offset the cost of staff that would have been paid for had this revenue come in. So in other words, money they are paying to draw in offset the cost of those salaries. So all of that's my understanding for at this point we'll go towards staff and to the last I heard. One of the rules with federal funding is that most of our academic services homeschools and private schools. We have quite a few. And so you're going to see just a second big chunk of our money is on the right end. And so what happens basically is I reach out the participation letter to every homeschool private school person living in the boundaries of the district and ask them if they want to participate in ESSER and in your money. And they have responded by survey, and you'll see that in just a second. Here's a breakdown of how we can spend this money. You can see the very first line is we had 536 eligible students who requested assistance from homeschool private school. And the per pupil amount out of ESSER money is $33.32 per child. The bulk of these students come from two private schools, St. Albert's and St. Mary's. We have very few that are just individual homeschools, but they all have access to that. And so right off the top of this plan, I have to take off $19,723.11. There's no giving right now. Very high budget money goes up to students. And so I'll work with each of those families in schools to make sure their plans are exactly what our schools do and meet all our requirements. The rest of the funds that they're going to see attached to the needs I just shared with you. And so I just want to kind of point out $82,104.89. I have to put that somewhere. I'm going to put it in professional learning because I have to budget everything. However, what that basically is, I'm going to do a special one that doesn't sound right, but it's reserved money for future needs. In other words, we cover everything that we're totally needing right now, and that is the amount that is left. So when you think about, why we have more CARES money, at this point, after we spend what's on that screen in the next 36 days, that is all that we left of that allocation. That's how much we probably did last year.
Wow.
Okay, so $20,000 goes to that intervention software I talked about. $60,000 for additional materials and resources, so that students might share, and they can take that home. That sounds like a lot, it's only about $5 a student. So it's not as much as it looks like. We're asking for $395 reimbursement from the feds for GT tuition we had to pay for Arbor Center because they had to have their services. We had to buy programs to do that. So we would like to reimburse for that. $500 to pay for EL staff to do those screenings and assessments they were unable to do because of the closure for students with English language barriers. We're looking for $10,000 for special education folks to do those screenings and assessments by the way they $10,000 is what we're going to set aside for compensatory education. Again, we'll know that number probably until October, but we feel like that's more than enough, so we might come in the budget there. $5,000 to get earmarked for potential assistive technology that all will have to offer those students here at the NI, should their hearts decide they need it. $95,000 of those assistance costs. And then another $57 for the product that goes out. The handheld portable devices that go into schools for the handset items, those are $20,000. And then $4,000 for purchase additional monitors, each side annex maintenance and the bus garage. The plexiglass is where I really do people pay kind of money in the budget. The plexiglass is looking at $25,000. And the interesting part of that was there was no labor within that. That's the goodness of materials, it's maintenance for the building. So it's just like that's just $30,000 purchases everything they need for food service, including those handheld devices for a big chunk of, including the carts, the throwaway materials, additional staff for when they have hired staff who do subs because they're not able to perform that and we with those. $1,000 for a live streaming device that will be held on our shipping in the central office for professional learning work meetings. That's one device for the district. $20,000 was the price tag assessed on that 2% loss of damage for just a few months that we had in the spring. $10,000 was the price for those new portable air filters that flow in those classrooms. We're looking at about $5,000. If we choose to have 19 nurses playing those lessons in one day, it'll cost us $5,000. Federal grant is high, so for people out of their money, they may decide they don't need 19 people to develop those, and they may choose 3. And so that cost could go down, but because they haven't fleshed out that plan, I just went with the max at 50. $3,000 is what we thought we might be able to provide. This is the only one that I'm not sure we can access. The incentives for students to form those camaraderie kind of groups to promote something in the we'll see. $55 is what will cost for a phone and a year worth of hotline services. So that cost is on the high end, right? This is paying a second for $27.50 an hour to answer phone calls. They keep a log, they visit those to us, and so that's just saying that they take so many calls over the course of the month. And then finally, the training outreach workshops that they were going to do, we anticipate that they staff work those over the course of the year, that costs about $2,000. And that also provides childcare for parents while they're at home. So that's all of the estimate. Any particular questions? If you didn't see a certain expense here, it's because I charged for years, so we'll see if there's a set.
I have a question. On the private school, homeschool allocations, if they're private school, like if they're at St. Al's or St. Francis, does that money get paid to the school for those resources or to the family?
They get service. So they pay for everything on a normal basis because they also get kind of one time to do that. So basically, I would have to come in and based on their needs, just like I would if they were school. If they make an order or want to do something, they're all through us and we pay. They never see enough.
That's a good question, Ms. Hunley. Yeah. All right. All right, Ms. McKinney, let's roll.
Your money, our expenses is $3,380.31. That's $5.70 per pupil. The same folks that wanted to 1 year. And so here is how $75,000 to spend. Just like $80-something previously, we have $5,000 that's not being allocated here. We'll keep unforeseen costs altogether. That was right at $90,000 that we have not allocated. $20,000 is used to purchase extra devices for students to use with data that they can check out when they need that. $15,000 will be just take some cost to classes, we anticipate that it's going to cost about $1,000. And it's only like 24 hours of home visits, so it's not that much, but and then finally, that food service device that you take in the room, that comes to cost us $24,000 for every time I have one of those mobile devices. So that's it in a nutshell. Basically, what another thing we need to do is make a plan for short-term, mid-term, and long-term closures. If we have short-term closures, we have to superintendent this board to decide whether or not it'll just be a closed day school or whether we're going to call it ATI. So we do not make that period, you know, versus this, and we will not deliver food on those days, even if they are ATI days. When we go to midterm closures, which are any days that are typically 10 days off, depending on day 3, we will begin food delivery on day 3. We will start food delivery, and then we'll go all over the ATI days, and then what you see as long-term will be very similar to what we've done in the last few months. So here's the differences. These are all the people who are present.
Wow. That was a lot of information, Ms. McKinney. I know you have questions. I know we need time to absorb this information. This is not an action item. This is an information-only item. And I just thank and applaud everybody that has spent so much time in really digging in to these needs, the financial needs for if and when we go to NTI again. I thank you for your leadership, Ms. McKinney. Any questions at this time, board members? Mr.
I just
Keto.
have one comment. My biggest concern was the $5 for the additional student material. Seems like one of the biggest complaint during the NTI session was the students didn't have enough books or hard copy material to reference. And I just don't see, if we are in an extended NTI session, that's not a lot of money to fund resources.
And I think it goes on to provide all sorts of resources and to better put us in a position to send those resources on the high school with students and utilize those resources we already have in the NTI world, because what we're heavily relying on is the digital world. And so part of this discussion we're going to teachers is to talk about how we merge the two. And essentially, you've got to really point that allow for that. Because we don't have everything just delivered digitally.
Right.
That is a great number.
But if you, and also need you to understand is that the state and the federal government is not expecting this to make us completely whole. In other words, this is based on our Title I allocation. The funding formula is based on that, and because we're a fairly affluent county, we do not get a lot of Title I money, and so you'll hear other districts will get a lot more based on their poverty numbers. And so what we know going into this is that we will have to exert some general fund money to do exactly what you're talking about, because the CARES money will not take care of all the issues. It is literally just to offset about $700,000 of expenses, knowing that there's going to be more to come as we work through the reopening plan, while we look into what actually happens next year. That is the security budgeting process, because we're also looking at possibly state cuts at some point as well. So it's a very shaky financial world that we're planning for, and one that we don't have a lot of answers for all the time either at this point.
Any other, Ms. Hunley?
I just had a preschool question when you were talking about what goes into when a family qualifies for preschool. What goes into that qualification? Like, is it looking at a snapshot of the last 6 months of their income, or what?
With preschool, it's a little more flexible than that, because emergencies can be considered. So, for example, they kind of have risk factors.
Okay.
Preschool services, homeless abuse, all that. 3-year-olds are not restricted on that basis. If they're at 160% of their poverty level, they qualify for preschool. If they're disabled as a 3-year-old, they qualify for preschool. And then we get funded based on the lag. So you can have a lot of kids this year, but they're living on funding from last year, which is like
Okay.
So there's sort of lag. So I guess what we're concerned about is that now are there going to be more folks who qualify for the 60% of the poverty level than typically? Because typically we don't have a lot of what we call at-risk, meaning college students. And then we can also look at Head Start on the main level. So that's a great question. There are different qualifying sort of events.
Okay.
But it's 160% of the poverty level, not quite exactly what we use for identification for reasons.
Okay.
We're going to move on. We are going to need, I think, more frequent updates if possible, Ms. McKinney. This is a lot of information. I know we probably still have questions and comments. If you all could just keep us really informed. I'm sure we will get questions from our constituents.
And this is an opportunity to read that. This is not going to be approved or looked at by the individual of August. So what I'm going to put in the system, we can make changes. We can add things as these come up. And we anticipate they will, which is what we're trying to reserve some. So these are great questions that I know we'll discuss, and potentially they've got a plan in outside of these funding sources for. So I'm going to ask those, but please, just email Mr. Schultz, and he will pass those on to me, and I will make sure that those are looked at. Again, you hear and see different things that we do sometimes, so
Yes.
we value that.
And if you will follow up on Mr. Woosley's question about hotspots and Wi-Fi on buses, I know we would all appreciate that. And any other major questions or concerns, major or minor, I don't care. You know who to send your questions to. And if we could have an updated report before August.
Yeah, you're going to take it next week. Everything we talk about today, we're specifically, you'll get it next week.
All right.
These are the items we give you, because we make them happen.
Excellent. Okay.
If I could just, and you hit upon it, Leslie talked at the very beginning about having to kind of rush because this is how this rolled out. We had to wait until we actually got the money, and then we had to wait to get the guidance. And so the large group of people that she had to work with were under pretty immense pressure because they just now extended that deadline beyond June 30th just within the last couple of days. And so kudos to her and all the groups that were able to meet remotely, some able to meet face-to-face to be able to pull this together because it was a lot of work.
Right. I thank you. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
those remarks. Thank you very much, Miss Leslie.
Be careful heading east.
We can table Eric, or you say you can do it in 5, whatever you want to do.
Let me ask the board, we have a second item in the instructional session, which is Eric Davis's presentation to us on annual drug and alcohol usage, which would be for the last school year. He could do this report very quickly, or we can table it in the interest of time so that we have more time to get into it. What's the pleasure of the board?
Well, he's been sitting out there since 4:30, and I have no problem having him give it down myself.
Any other comments? Mr. Woosley?
No,
Okay,
he's here, let's do it.
all right, we'll move ahead.
Jane, if you would yell at him real quick. Thank you.
Welcome, Mr. Davis.
So what you have before you here is the information that's provided every summer in regards to drug and alcohol violations in the district. And obviously this year we're a little bit lower than the previous years based on the fact that we were out of school from March 12 on. I tried to put this together where you see it all in one document. Basically, if you look at each 2 columns, that's a different page. If you will, so it's broken down multiple different ways, by offense, by school, by gender, by race, by grade, by month, and then you'll see the year-by-year comparison, and then some notes on other year-to-date totals. I did want to just highlight a couple of probably see there, our biggest issue is the use of THC. And we categorize that with marijuana, but THC in itself is by far the biggest issue that we have. Of those 24, 22 of them were synthetic marijuana that is utilized in a day. Only 2 of those were actual marijuana that you can see other places. So you can definitely say that's our biggest concern as of now. And I did bring with you all, leave it here in your choice so you want to pick them up. Get to think about printing them out for you, but they're here from on. And those are the new things that we're battling in the district in terms of dates. There are multiple ways, including one of those I did with my watch here. We had a battle with some that just pops up here and usually is used to debate whether the battle or THC.
I think you can share those, Mr. Davis, so we can refer to them through our discussion, and we appreciate you bringing those. We are not going to rush through this report, Eric. It's far too important. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So what you see here, what you see here are the most updated. We have not seen all of these in the district, but I don't know what these money initiatives are easily given, such as sweatshirt screens that are almost impossible to detect. But like I said, smartwatches, cell phones, key fobs, dates are very difficult to find, and also the back page shows you just a variety, including this is the one that I see, which is a car pick. The car pick can be used for baby. A huge concern is also the size. It's getting smaller and smaller, and being able to see the student's mouth, which is fairly important to find these. So, it's so small that they can almost do it undetected, and they'll simply, oftentimes bring their shirt up over their mouth or use their sleeve and blow each other's and basically undetected. So, I want to commend the administrators. They put a lot of work and effort into these. I wanted to bring up one point that I know probably stands out is out of the 33 and 17 of them were at South High School. But I also want to make sure that that does not view that necessarily as an indictment on the school. The school and staff are very, very diligent over there, and they investigate these things quite well. And I was involved in a lot of those, and I commend them for their work in finding these and addressing them and solving them out as best as they can. I'm happy to answer any questions. I did want to bring up one point that's not on this sheet, but if you see that 13 of the 33 were 10th graders, I went back to look just at that class as a whole, and they were actually the highest attendances from last year as well as 9th graders. So that does tell me a little bit that we have a cultural problem and maybe that's a specific group that they just kind of culture this is okay. And so I thought as we report, we can attack that group specifically, whether that's the SEL curriculum, or the administrator. That was not just an outlier, it's a CBD issue. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
The one thing I noticed is on the last column down at the bottom, 29 out of 33 first time, and all of a sudden it just drops off second time, third time, fourth.
I will meet with every single student who's involved with this parent already, and for the most part, we rarely ever have a reason. Like I said, you see 4 out of the 33 this year, it was either the second offense, or I will point out the third and fourth time there was the same person. I had the third and fourth offense this year. So that's important to know that it's a good thing. I think that what we do in the district does work when we catch them. The problem is going to probably grow and become difficult to find, but kudos to the
I think you have to be very careful at making that leap of faith that we are doing such a good job and that they are learning from their mistakes, because I think they also become more creative and more inventive and more clever. So, Mr. Woosley had a question.
So this board's done two things this past year. I wanted to see how it's impacted this. We've changed our policy to include all nicotine abuses, and then we've gone to no nicotine-free campuses. How's that impacted this? It looks like it hasn't made much difference.
Well, this is not included, so this is only drug and alcohol. If you go back and look at nicotine, offenses, they are pretty much flatlined from previous years in the past. We've had a pretty large number of those also come from vape, very few cigarettes, very few mouth tobacco, chewing, things of that nature. The vast majority of them are tobacco vapes. The difficulty of those is determining what is tobacco and what is vapes. We'll discuss that a little bit. The police officers that we utilize do have field testing kits, so those are not always necessarily have been accurate. So we're trying to work that to send it to the lab. It takes a couple of months to come back. So, but to answer your question, it has been pretty flat line and has not gone down up a lot. Again, it just seems to be moving into a different direction, which is
So do we need to do something different to stay ahead of it?
my opinion on that is if the more that we attack the device, I think the better we are across any tobacco, anything that we actually try to put alcohol into a pot and try to smoke that out of it. So to me, I think if we can put more emphasis on the device, the better off we are. Just because the vast majority of these are they have to use a device. Same thing with tobacco. So that would be my opinion. We would continue to work on the device.
Didn't we just change that policy to include vaping
We did.
devices?
Yes.
We did.
It doesn't go into effect until July 1st.
Okay.
So that's good moving forward. It's, I mean, in terms of what can we do to search for and find those devices and staying on top of the ever-changing trend, which, I mean, these are becoming so difficult to detect and find. And we have to be careful too with not searching without probable cause and things of that nature, with like our policy states.
It's going to get a whole lot worse when they start wearing a mask.
Yes, sir. That would be that would be a significant challenge.
I appreciate those questions, Mr. Woosley, and if there is a way to do this, Mr. Davis, in light of our new policy for smoke-free campuses, I think we would appreciate some information on what the extent of the problem has been or created for administrators to sort of police that policy to the best of your ability.
Sure.
I know that'll be hard.
In the future, would you like me to include tobacco maybe on a second sheet?
Yes.
Okay.
I would, yeah.
Yes, yes, because we've taken a strong position. And with respect to the data that you have provided for by school, and you referenced the number of infractions from one of our high schools.
Yes, ma'am.
I am not alarmed by that at all. I appreciate their diligence.
Absolutely.
Where I am concerned are at the other two schools where their numbers are significantly lower. So I would just like to make that note that I don't believe that their students are all that much different.
Yes, ma'am.
So, other questions or comments?
Yeah, with the devices continuing to change and get more sophisticated, should we educate our parents with pictures, on our, once a year,
wonder.
constantly showing?
We have we have a very healthy relationship with Operation Parent, and they are constantly sending out information. One thing that we were going to do last year and stuff happened is that we were bringing a state trooper in. Eric and I have talked, we still have that scheduled for an education session for you guys and all principals Obviously, it has to be when we can get together in a large
A
group.
bigger crowd. Right. You raise a good point, but I do, I don't want to assume that Operation Parent is reaching all of our middle and high school parents. We know they made that concerted effort with fourth graders across the district. But that would be something that I think Mr. Davis can certainly communicate with.
Yeah, because this hoodie string just amazes me.
Yes.
And the phone also. I mean,
Just get-
That's
Yeah.
kind of the problem, putting that information out, is it changes so quickly. You know, they're always coming up with
Oh,
new stuff.
right.
So-
Yeah. Yeah.
How early in our schools do we start talking to kids about this stuff?
Well, it's a balancing line with parents. You know, if you're getting down into elementary, you will, just as a former elementary principal, you know, we always tried very carefully to make sure we were not infringing upon the parents' right to have that initial conversation. But in terms of, I know that it is part of discussions and curriculum in the middle school, especially with guidance counselors as they begin to do that work. While I haven't been in the elementary principal role for a year now, I know that we did not have that conversation with fifth graders. So,
I just wonder if that's something that we should look at, because as I have 4 girls, and when I look at my oldest at what maturity level she was at 5th grade versus the siblings that follow behind, I think that it probably is a discussion that needs to, I mean, it used to be in Oldham County schools, they would say no to drugs and everything way earlier in the process, and I would just really like to look at getting that back into maybe the elementary schools and starting the conversation earlier about, you know, it's not just a pill or smoking pot, that, you know, any kind of, this kind of stuff is bad for you, and get the kids introduced, I think, at an earlier age of saying no to trying this stuff to begin with, because I think that's where it, you know, I think that's where it comes from, is they have an older sibling or, you know, or a kid next door, and if we can get them to say no the first time, then it's a lot easier to say no subsequent times and not get hooked early on to have them in our schools.
And that was one reason why we partnered with Operation Parent when they put out the fourth grade handbook, was trying to get in the hands of parents the skills for the parents to have the skills to have the conversation with the child as well. Because obviously this is a partnership that, you know, we're only around a child 7 to 8 hours a day for, depending on what year it is, 170 days or so, but parents are around them a lot. And so that's the power, and one reason we wanted to network with Operation Parent, because a lot of times parents will be leery to talk to counselors just for stigma purposes, or they didn't have a good experience in school. And Operation Parent's a independent third party that they tend to connect with. So we'll take that into consideration. We'll look at what we're doing curriculum-wise within our health and PE, and then also just retouch base with Operation Parent, make sure that they're continuing their stellar job, which I know they do a good job.
They continually revise that manual, Ms. Hundley, and I call it a manual, it's a little booklet, and it's parent-oriented, but it was also optional for parents to participate in that program, and I think Mr. Davis hit that nail on the head with our elementary families, but you raised some really valid points. The
Yeah,
age of abuse just continues to go downward.
Well, and peer pressure can work both ways. I mean, if our kids are in a class together and they all hear the same message, then a lot of times peer pressure will work the opposite way too, of,
Yes.
no, I'm not going to do that, and you know it's bad too, because we all heard it
Yes.
in whatever.
Yes.
So, you know,
And I also,
relying on,
yes, I also think that our elementary schools have relied on PTAs and PTOs to help deliver that message, and whether or not it's been done effectively, but that's another avenue that our schools have utilized, so. Any other questions for Mr. Davis?
Done a good job the first year.
thank you, sir.
Yes, yes.
Yes, you have.
Thank you, Mr. Davis.
Yes, ma'am.
We appreciate your due diligence on some
Happy to
tough
do
stuff.
Mr. Davis, would you do me a favor and clean that mic real quick before you get up, and then I'll go over to Ms. Anderson and have her
Thank
walk
you,
in?
thank you.
Eric, you look more comfortable wearing what you wore to church yesterday.
I thought you might say something about that.
Hey, you got Austin in the same.
I did. He told me his father would be rolling around in his grave if he saw him, so my dad probably would too. So
When he walked,
don't tell him.
when he walked in like that, I thought, oh no,
I've been hanging around with him too much, I guess.
he's been hanging around with you too much.
Yeah, that's true. Good point.
Thank you, sir.
All right, you bet. Take care.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Welcome, Ms. Anderson. We are ready for the treasurer's report. Yes, it is.
I guess we will begin on page 4, the beginning of the treasurer's report. We have our beginning balance of cash, $57 million, and the ending balance of almost $54 million. I thought it might be interesting from an accounting standpoint to compare where we were last year to where we are this year, considering we have such a different environment. Our governmental fund receipts this year are 6.9, almost $7 million, and our receipts the same month last year were 7.1, so there's not a whole lot of difference there. But if you look at the disbursements, we're at 10.3, 10.4 this year. Last year, we were over $12 million. So we are seeing a reduction in costs there. We're not as busy. We're not doing as many things. And if you look at the food service, we're at about $200,000, $300,000 for both receipts and disbursements. And this is half of what our volume was a year ago this time.
Wow.
So it's interesting
Yes.
to me. So then below that, we see our bonded construction funds, and there's really very little change from what we've seen in previous months. We're still seeing the interest coming in on the bond issue and just a tiny bit of disbursements. If we go to the next page on the governmental funds cash balances, we can see each of the funds, and again, I wanted to compare to where we were last year. This year, we're at $50 million in total. Last year, we were at $56 million, but we also had $8.7 million of Camden funds in there. So that difference is about $6 or $7 million. So that really accounts for all of the variance. So if we go to the next page, the comparison of our historical actuals. This first line with our beginning fund beginning balances, you can see that our annual budget for fiscal 20 is anticipating quite a bit taken from the contingency. And I just mentioned that because this is the first time that KDE has mentioned to us in the finance officers meeting that there will be revenue shortfalls. They have been hesitant to do that, and I mean, it was pretty apparent to everybody, but now they are stating that. So just something to be careful of. I know we did this purposely, but it is something may hit us a little harder next year as well. On our next line, the general fund revenues, we are at 96% of budget, and I'm expecting we will be very close to budget by year end. On the salary piece, we're at 84% of budget, which is a little bit misleading because we're going to have 5 pay periods in June, so we will eat up that budget quite a bit. As we look in our general fund revenue, a lot of our revenue is already complete. We've gotten all the general property tax revenue that we're going to get. There's been a bit of a shortfall on the franchise tax. Let's see, we are, we'll have one more month of the motor vehicle taxes. We'll have one more month of utility as well, and then one more month of the SEEK. So we should come pretty close to what we targeted. In the next section, the capital outlay, we are 100% paid in that. And in the building fund revenue, we have our last 50% that will come in June, and then that will be fully paid as well. On the following page, on page 7, we have a detail of each of the property, each of the revenue line items. The only thing I want to call your attention to is partway down on account 3130, we've got National Board Certified Teacher. That revenue is expected to come in June. All right, if we go to page 9, we've got the expenses by category, and really just only 2 things I wanted to call your attention to here. As we look at salaries, that is 73% of our total cost so far. If we add that with our benefits, we are up at 83% of our total costs. And then if we flip to page 14, on the second to the last line item, very big amount, we got our buses in. We got 6 buses, and then we got one in July of this year that was left over from last year. So that's why that number is a little extra high. But they are all here a little bit earlier than they usually are.
Which numbered account is that, Ms. Anderson?
It is under the section 07
732.
property,
Second from the bottom.
Thank you.
0732.
Thank you.
Mhm. So that was 6 buses for this year and 1 left over from last year. I guess I'll call your attention to one more thing. If you go to the next page, page 15, under account 0739, there's a large negative amount, and I just wanted to let you know that that was the North Oldham High School revenue that came in for the baseball lighting fields. So that will work to offset the costs as Brent moves forward with that. On page 17, we have our expenses by function, and our first line item is instruction. This is the one that KDE likes to see go up, and you can see from previous years, we've gone from 36, 38, 39, and $41 million. The other area where we're seeing a large increase in is kind of down in the middle, 2580, technology services, and this is a combination of things, and that is moving some of these software costs from other departments into technology where Trey can have a little bit more control over what happens with that and more review. And we've also spent quite a bit of money in that area trying to get caught up with technology. Page 19, we have our bonding, summary of bonding potential, no changes on that. Page 20, we have our balance sheets by fund, and there's nothing significant to note on that, except that we are moving towards year end and all the year-end entries that will happen in June and the audit. On page 33, we have the income statements also by fund. And that is all for the treasurer's report on that piece.
Yes, ma'am. Questions or comments?
Just
Mr.
one.
Woosley?
And I'll get back here on the page on it, but it was like 13 or 14, but there was a graduation expense, and we had about 24,000 on it. Was that, did that include everything that we were at so far through the end of May?
It would be,
Okay.
yeah.
And then I noticed
But
that
that
we
doesn't
were,
mean that's the end of the cost.
Right, yeah,
That's
right.
what's been received.
just so far.
Yeah.
And then we had about 390,000 in diesel fuel, but we had about 550 budgeted. So,
They've not been driving as much.
right, I was
Yeah.
pointing out we're saving about $160,000 so far.
And the price of gas has dropped quite a bit as well.
Not anymore.
Not anymore, it's creeping back up, isn't it?
It's going back up fast.
Thank you, Mr. Woosley. Other questions? Motion to approve treasurer's report, please. Made by Ms. Hunley, seconded by Mr. Kehoe. All those in favor? That's 5-0. Bills and claims, please, Ms. Anderson.
All right, that begins on page 87.
Yes, it does.
And this is a list of the invoices since our last board meeting. And we've got 1,000 invoices and almost $9 million. And for comparison purposes, a year ago, we were at 1,900 invoices and 11.4 million in costs. So,
I was very interested in hearing those figures. We discussed that last month.
you did?
Since, well, I thought we did, but in light of having gone to NTI.
yeah.
I was very interested in that. Questions for Ms. Anderson on bills and claims?
Just one.
Mr. Woosley?
And I'm trying to find it, but somewhere there was a donation for Centerfield Gym for about $25,000. I just want to make note of that, and if you could explain that a little bit.
Excellent.
That is,
Either one.
that was a technology grant, well, not a technology grant, I'm sorry, a donation for technology enhancements within Centerfield's gymnasium for, I think, overhead projector, or, sorry, not projector, the screen, and the thing above. So it was a very nice donation.
Was it a in-house donation?
I wanted to believe it was PTA through fundraiser.
Okay. Just wanted to acknowledge that.
Yes. Thank you, Camden PTA.
Centerfield.
I mean, Centerfield.
Oh,
Centerfield. We'll get too many C schools. Centerfield.
Centerfield, we stand corrected. Other questions or comments? Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Motion to approve bills and claims, please. Made by Mr. Dodson and seconded by the Woos. All those in favor, and that's 5-0. Thank you, Ms. Anderson.
Would you have Brent step in just in case there's a question on consent? Bohannon. Thanks.
Board members, we have a few sets of minutes to approve. We were all present for all of these meetings. The first set were from May 14th, a special called meeting. Were there any corrections or additions? Motion to approve, made by Mr. Dodson, seconded by Mr. Kehoe. All those in favor, and that's 5-0. May 18th was our regularly scheduled board meeting. Any corrections or additions? Motion to approve, please. Made by Mr. Woosley, seconded by Mr. Kehoe. All those in favor, and that's 5-0. And we had one more special called meeting. That was June 10th. Corrections or additions? Motion to approve, please. Made by Mr. Woosley and seconded by Mr. Dodson. All those in favor, and that's 5-0. Thank you, everybody. Superintendent, we're ready for your notice to the Board of Personnel Actions, sir.
So really just kind of standard fare for this time of the year. Obviously starting to hire a lot more people and a lot less resignations. It's just what happens in June.
Are there any comments on that report?
No,
Ms.
I
Sun-
have a question. Greg, are you concerned about once a plan is put out for schools to reopen that we'll have anybody take early retirement or anybody will drop off?
I know there has been some talk on social media about that. In fact, I think it may have been one of our employees that put something out. I've not heard anything. I think that the whole idea behind if we can get reopened and we would be safe, that would probably not. I probably have more concern about substitute teachers not wanting to come back in the buildings because obviously they have retired and some of them have some experience to them. But we won't really know when we send out the certified staff survey. We'll get a sense for where we might be a little bit better on that. But nothing is popping, and I'm not seeing any statewide trends right now.
Okay. And when is that survey going out?
About the same time as we're putting the other one out, fairly soon, either late this week, early next.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Hunley. Welcome to the room, Mr. Bohannon.
Thank you.
We are now proceeding with our consent items, and we have items A through J.
And just want to draw your attention once again, you did have a supplemental for enclosure B1 for the South Oldham High School Stadium turf. That's one reason I asked Mr. Bohannon to come in, just in case there's any questions, because this was something you all received an email within the last day or so.
We did, and we had a chance to process that in addition to this. So can I ask if there are any questions or comments? All right, then your recommendations, sir.
Approve the consent items as presented in your packet.
Motion to approve the consent agenda, please. Made by Mr. Kehoe, seconded by Mr. Woosley. All those in favor, and that would be 5-0. Thank you, everybody. Superintendent, do we have any recognition, sir?
We do. Unfortunately, we are still in the position where we cannot invite folks outside of this small group into this meeting, but we do have a recognition. First time that I have actually seen this since being superintendent. In 2019-2020, the Midway University KHSAA Male Track and Field Student Athlete of the Year is one of our own. Oldham County High School student Jacob Kehoe is a recipient of the 2019-20 Midway University KHSSA Male Track and Field Student Athlete of the Year Award. This award is based on athletic and academic achievement, as well as community service and leadership. Each year, an administrator, guidance counselor, or coach from a KHSA member school may nominate one individual per team for consideration. A panel of judges selected by Midway University and the KHSAA review all nominations and make the selection of each individual sport male athlete student of the year. The nominations are judged on 60% weighting of overall athletic achievement, 20% academic achievement, and 20% community service leadership. In the event of a tie, the judges have the discretion to select the final winner. Nominees must have an overall GPA of 3.0 or higher to qualify and be academically eligible to play in the season which they are nominated. And I know Mr. Kehoe, being a board member, this is somewhat bittersweet because there was a very, very good chance that Mr. Kehoe was going to be bringing some gold back to Oldham County, and just because the COVID situation was not able to participate, was within a fraction of a school record. So it is bittersweet that I announce this, but congratulations for Jacob for winning that, because like I said, the first time in 4 years that we've had such thing.
Yes, and we want to congratulate Dad,
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Patrick.
Yeah, we were quite surprised, like I told you. The notice we got was from, I think, somebody's, a Hanover coach, so,
Oh,
yeah.
excellent. And we so look forward to our student and staff recognitions. This is an awesome recognition for young Jacob Kehoe. My remark when I found out about Jacob's recognition was that great kids do not happen by accident. Great kids have great parents.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good job, Jacob. Let's roll on then, Superintendent. We have one superintendent report.
Mr. Bohannon is present and for his OCS construction report.
Hello.
Thank you. Included in your packet is the construction update report for June. These include all of the major construction projects that are under construction at this point, as well as the addition on the latter pages of the ones that are in design. I know you all have been going quite long tonight, so if there's any specific questions that I can address for that, but otherwise the entirety of the report I think you all have had for a week to review. So.
We do, and it's an excellent report. Is there anything you wanted to call our attention to, Mr. Bohannon?
I would just like to maybe on page, I guess that's 358.
Yes, sir.
And it has the updates for the three major construction projects that had started before we were out of school there in the North Middle HVAC renovation replacement project. The addition is pretty much walled up and waiting for steel to enclose the refrigerator and freezer, and the pad in the back is completed. The South Oldham High School administrative addition and addition on the back of the gymnasium is well underway with the demolition pretty much complete in both of those areas. The site grading in the front area is nearing completion as well, and they have actually started to build back and come out of the ground at that location. And at Buckner Elementary School, you can see there's some major site work going on at this point, and we're anxiously awaiting approval for the state to start footers and foundations.
Wow. Questions or comments for Mr. Bohannon? Ms. Hunley?
Did you find out what happened at Camden with the flood?
Yes, there was a sprinkler pipe fitting let loose and dumped about 2 inches of water in the entirety of our new addition. But I will say that the fire department, South Oldham Fire Department, was excellent. They responded within 7 minutes of the call of the alarm going off for loss of pressure. And by the time I got there, which was about 25 minutes after the call, they had 14 or 15 gentlemen squeegeeing the entirety of the building. So we very much appreciate their efforts, and we could not have had that place cleaned up and looking as it did before the incident by that Friday without their help. So
excellent.
Very much thank you.
Was that on old piping or new piping?
It was existing piping. Evidently, the piping, the fittings that were used 30 some odd years ago, we don't do it that way anymore for this reason.
So is there maybe a concern we should maybe upgrade some fittings?
No, I think that the adjacency to where we were doing the addition probably would have been the cause. The fittings throughout the rest of the building, like I said, been there for 30 years and we've never had an issue with it. This fitting was an existing fitting that was adjacent to where we added on for the new addition, so I would assume that some rattling and some work around it in construction, vibration may have caused it to give loose a little bit. And then just over time, it slipped out the fitting. So Luckily, like I said, the fire department was there right away. The school and custodial staff were there, cleaned it up, and then we had a remediation company come in. They were there by 2:30 a.m. The call was at 11 o'clock a.m. So by 5 o'clock that morning, we had all the water out of the building, and we had the dehumidifiers going, and they followed up the next couple of days with some cleanup efforts. And so by Friday of that week, we were like it never happened. I think that's their slogan, actually.
Wow.
Saved a lot of money doing it that way.
Say it?
Saved a lot of money getting them in there quick.
Yes, sir.
I think I saw a cost in our financials, and it wasn't that large of a cost.
No, it was very reasonable for the amount of
Yeah.
the amount of cleanup that was required. I thought the price was very reasonable, and it was about half of what our deductible would have been to turn it into insurance. So,
Thank you.
Was there any major damage done to any of the, like, was the kiln ruined or anything?
no,
like that?
luckily, where it happened was in the hallway above a doorway. So really, the only major damage was to ceiling tile, and the cleanup effort was just a lot of water, and sprinkler water is not exactly clean. So
Gotcha.
it was.
Thank you. Any other questions on Mr. Bohannon's report? All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Bohannon.
Thank you all.
Superintendent, we are ready for action item K, sir.
All right, Ms. Corson is in the House, but there was only one policy revision that we're looking at right now. It's the amendment by the 2020 legislative session concerning enrollment of students. If you have any questions, obviously she can answer those.
Right. Any additional questions or comments? All right, your recommendation, sir.
Approve that policy as presented.
All right, motion to approve action item K, please, made by Ms. Hunley, seconded by Mr. Dodson. All those in favor, and that's 5-0. Action item L, sir.
We have the OCS preschool calendar for you to approve tonight. Knowing that sometimes this becomes a little bit flexible based on snow days and based on those other things, and we do a preschool update every month, but this is what we're trying to start the year with.
Yes, sir. Questions or comments? So, did you have a question, Mr. Kehoe?
No,
All right.
like you kind of summed it up in your
Yeah.
comment there.
So your recommendation, sir?
Approve the 2021 OCS preschool calendar as presented.
Motion to approve, please. Made by Mr. Kehoe and seconded by Mr. Woosley. All those in favor, and that's 5-0. One more action item, M, please, sir.
And once again, Ms. Corson's here if you have any direct questions, but it's obviously time for us to renew our fleet property and general liability and workers' compensation insurance companies. She always does her due diligence and make sure we get the quotes in and that these are the best that we can do.
Yes, sir. Questions or comments? Ms. Corson.
We found out that because we did not use all of our buses in the time that the government closed, basically recommended closing schools, we will actually get credit towards our fleet insurance bill for this year, so.
Excellent.
It's really up to be about $32,000.
Oh, good news.
So when we go to pay,
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? So your recommendation, sir.
Renew our insurance policies through Insurance Associates for property, general liability, fleet, umbrella, and workers' compensation coverage.
All right. Motion to approve, please. Made by Mr. Dodson, seconded by Mr. Woosley. All those in favor, and that's 5-0. There is one information item for our review, and that is the monthly district energy usage. And at this time, the board needs to go into executive session, and that would be pursuant to KRS 61.8101 CK and KRS 156.5576C. to discuss a preliminary personnel evaluation of Superintendent Schultz, the public disclosure of which could jeopardize our position. So may I have a motion to go into executive session, please? Motion made by Mr. Kehoe and seconded by Mr. Woosley. All those doing anything?
She's singing karaoke.
So the board has just come out of executive session, and I would like to share a statement before I call for any action. In conformance with the superintendent's contract, the board is required to perform a year-end evaluation on or prior to the July school board meeting. In keeping with KRS 156.577, while in executive session, the board conducted a preliminary discussion of the year-end evaluation of the performance of Superintendent Schultz in closed session. The process of conducting the superintendent's evaluation was as follows. First, the evaluation documents were sent out to board members in May. Then board members were given approximately 2 weeks to complete their documents and return them to me. The board members were asked to use the following indicators: exemplary, accomplished, developing, and growth required. Board members were encouraged to provide comments when appropriate. The preliminary results were discussed, and a formal evaluation was prepared in executive session today. The evaluation document centers on the 2019-2020 standards adopted by the board for the superintendent. The standards include, number 1, strategic leadership, which includes vision, mission, and review of data. Number 2, instructional leadership, teaching and learning. Number 3, cultural leadership, trust and support in the community. Number 4, human resource leadership, highly effective, diverse staff. Number 5 is managerial leadership, which is operations and resources. Number 6 is collaborative leadership, which is partnerships, success after graduation. And number 7 is influential leadership, which includes board relationships, policies, and regulations. Mr. Schultz received an exemplary rating on 7 of 7 standards. It is the consensus of this board that Mr. Schultz did an exceptional job this year as superintendent. We are very pleased with the climate and culture throughout the district under his leadership. The board challenged Mr. Schultz in several areas, and he has made nice progress in those areas. We look forward to continuing to work with Mr. Schultz as we all remain committed to student learning for all students. I'm going to ask if there was any action coming out of executive session.
Chairman Fletcher,
Mr. Woosley.
I would like to offer a motion, make a motion that we approve the superintendent's evaluation as presented.
Motion was made by Mr. Woosley, seconded by Mr. Dodson. All those in favor, and that's 5-0. I would also add, at the conclusion of the superintendent's evaluation, that no superintendent could have served this district as well or better during the last several months that we navigated uncharted territory during a pandemic. And I, as the board chair, am grateful for that leadership. Any other comments? Then I'm going to ask the superintendent for his recommendation.
Well, first, I'll thank you for the nice evaluation. Obviously, a work in progress, and we will continue to strive to get better in all that we do. At that time, I'd make the motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, please. Made by Mr. Kehoe, seconded by Ms. Hundley. All those in favor, and that's 5-0. Blah, 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 blah.
He almost said.
Are we off, Ann? Okay. anyone?